Now in today's video, we're going to be talking about a brand new bill that's just been introduced to the California legislature called SB 1160. Brought to us by our good friend, Senator Anthony Portantino. Now, you may recognize the name. He is the same individual who has cost the state of California millions of dollars in litigating SB 2. This is the new law that is currently been enjoined, having to deal with CCW holders and sensitive locations and everything like that. Senator Portantino is probably one of the most prolific anti-gun legislators in the entire United States, and he is coming to a jurisdiction near you. Senator Portantino is not to be confined to the state of California. He has greater aspirations to make it into the United States House of Representatives, so he can go ahead and try to restrict your rights or completely abrogate them throughout the entire United States. So you need to be conscientious of his actions, and he doesn't operate in a vacuum. He has several colleagues that feel the same way that he does. We are all painfully aware of that. Okay, guys, I'm going to pause this video for just a second. USCCA, which sponsors these videos, they're doing a giveaway right now, and it's pretty cool. It does end soon, so you're going to want to learn all about it. You can read about it in the description directly below this video. Get on it right away. All right, let's go back to the video. So let's get into what Senate Bill 1160 would do. So Senator Portantino has come up with this great idea. He wants every single gun in California to be registered. More importantly, he wants this registration process to go on a yearly basis, meaning that if you own a firearm, every single year, you would have to re-register that firearm with the state of California. If you fail to do so, you are subject to a $1,000 fine for each firearm that you failed to register. Now, I use the term registration somewhat cautiously, okay? The federal government in a bill called it's not a bill, it's actually 18 USC Code Section 926, specifically prohibits gun registration. The government, both federal and state, cannot maintain some sort of ongoing database of firearm ownership. Now, there's a very specific reason for this. As Americans, we don't trust the government. That's kind of our founding principle. The reality is, and I'm going to sidebar for a second because I think this is really important. In California, when someone is being charged and prosecuted for a criminal act, the title of that litigation is entitled The People versus Mr. Jones, or The People versus, whoever the defendant happens to be. There was an incident that happened not too long ago where one of my law partner was in court, and the district attorney was talking to another individual, and he said, "Well, I represent the people." And my law partner got incredibly indignant, and he said, "No, you don't. You don't represent the people. You represent the state. As a criminal defense attorney, I represent the people." And while that isn't exactly the way the system is supposed to work, that's exactly the way it is. Okay, the fact of the matter is the state has become a specific institution. And as we have seen, the state's interests are directly at odds with the people, us, all right? And we see this with anti-gun legislatures as well as anti-gun prosecutors all the time. So in this particular context, Mr. Portantino has a bit of an issue that he has to deal with. He has the federal government specifically stating you may not have a registration database And yet, that's exactly what his proposed legislation creates. A constant, ongoing, constantly being updated gun registration database. And he calls it a gun registration. Okay, I mean, he doesn't mince words. This is gun registration. And then he puts in language within the bill that says, even though this is gun registration, it's not gun registration, and therefore does not run afoul of the federal prohibition of gun registration. Okay, you can't have it both ways. It either is or it is not, all right? And this absolutely is. So it's unconstitutional on its face, all right? It absolutely violates the already existing federal code prohibiting just such an item. Now, why would someone want to go through the process of having this massive administrative requirement? And that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to require a lot of people doing a lot of work. For what purpose? Well, why do you have gun registration? You have gun registration so that ultimately it can lead to gun confiscation. After all, if you know where the guns are, then you can go ahead and marshal your resources to go after and actually retrieve those guns and destroy them. And one can legitimately suspect that that is exactly the purpose behind this. Now, from a practical matter, this becomes unbelievably onerous. You know, someone who has, say, 2 firearms, right? Assuming that this law was actually constitutional, which it's not, but assuming that this law was constitutional, you would have to look at it and say, okay, so what type of burden is it for somebody to, fill out a postcard every, year stating that they still own these guns? And, that remains to be seen. That becomes debatable as to how actually onerous this is. But let's say somebody has a collection of, say, 30 or 40 firearms. They are going to have to, on a yearly basis, go through this process. Oh, and by the way, in the bill, it says, oh, yes, we get to charge you for this. We just don't know yet how much we're going to charge. We're going to allow the California Department of Justice to be able to set the fee schedule on this. And I'm sure they'll be entirely reasonable. Oh, let's say $100 a gun. Well, so it's going to cost me, for the 30 firearms that I have, it's going to cost me $3,000 a year in order to maintain these things? It seems absolutely ludicrous. It's also interesting who has been specifically exempted from this proposed law. The government, right? It specifically says, well, if it's a law enforcement agency or some sort of agency that has firearms, there, then they are exempt. They do not have to go through this yearly administrative process. Now, interestingly, cops are not completely exempt from this. If a law enforcement officer has been issued a firearm by his department, then that firearm is in fact exempt from this legislation. However, let's say an officer has gone out and purchased other firearms for their use, potentially even use on duty. Well, this officer would still have to go through this yearly process for each of those additional firearms. Again, it's completely unconstitutional. There's absolutely, if we look at Bruin and we do the Bruin analysis, there was absolutely nothing like this that existed at the time of the ratification. So it fails sort of prima facie on that. Will this bill be passed? Oh, yeah, absolutely. In California, it will be passed. Will Governor Newsom sign it? You betcha. Will it be litigated? Of course it will, and it'll probably be enjoined. It's supposed to go into effect on June of 2025, July 1st, of 2025. So we will have to see. And like I said, guys, if you don't live in California, don't think that, you're necessarily off the hook. Portantino has greater ambitions. He wants to get into the United States Capitol, and he wants to start imposing these types of restrictions on all of us. Now, it is interesting, though, when we look at Portantino, because he's so incredibly prolific when it comes to developing anti-gun legislation, and really, really bad anti-gun legislation. I mean, it would be one thing to sit there and say, yeah, I totally disagree with this, with this law that this guy has created, but the law was crafted in such a way that it's tight. It's going to be difficult to, have it overturned. He's just sloppy. I mean, I don't say that to be disparaging to the guy, although I have no hesitation by doing so. He's a lousy legislature. He creates bills that are literally doomed to failure. And yet his constituency continues to reelect this slob. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, he is, clearly, right, an expert on firearms and firearms law. What kind of robust background has this individual developed so that he has this corpus of knowledge that, he can speak intelligently to those of us in the Second Amendment community? Well, Senator Portantino has spent the majority of his non-political life working in the film industry. He more specifically worked in, just to be very specific so that I don't misrepresent his, his curriculum vitae here. His professional experience includes working in the art department and as a property master with American Playhouse. So clearly, Senator Portantino is an expert when it comes to firearms and being able to regulate them. Anyways, like I said, does it have a chance of passing out? It does. Does it have a chance of actually going into effect? No, it doesn't. But it's the type of stuff that we have to deal with. So I encourage you to, kind of keep an eye on the legislation. Again, this is SB 1160, just recently proposed in the California legislature, and coming to a legislature near you. As always, guys, if you would like to contact me, please do so at steven@artemishq.com. And as always, train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose.